My name's Olivia Martin with the Four Seasons Garden Club, and I want to welcome Andrew tonight. Andrew Barocco is an expert breeder. I had the privilege of hearing him speak and meeting him at the Heritage Rose annual, what is it? I don't remember what it's called, the Heritage Rose Society's annual meeting, and it was in Tyler, Texas this year. Tyler, Texas is, of course, home to Earl Campbell, who was called the Rose of Texas, and it is also known as the Rose Capital of Texas. And Andrew spoke and gave such a fantastic talk on plant breeding and some of the techniques he's used and his love for roses that and about how to draw out different characteristics. And I knew that my home garden club would be interested in this. So I will let Andrew do his formal introduction because I don't remember all of his credentials, but I did want to share kind of how we met and how much I'm looking forward to this talk tonight. Thank you, Andrew, for being here with us.
Well, thank you, Olivia, and you're very welcome. And I just want to say thank you to the Four Seasons Garden Club for inviting me as a speaker. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to talk about one of my favorite things in the whole world, which is plant breeding. So, a little bit about me. I basically come from two plant-loving families, so I've been exposed to gardening from a very young age. And I've worked on a lot of different crops. I've worked in sweet potatoes and wheat and a little bit of corn and tomatoes and peppers and of course roses for a very large portion of my career so far. And the reason why I got into roses, you're probably wondering, well, why even like what's so special about roses? Well, I used to be, for as an example, I used to be into hibiscus for a little bit, and I loved hibiscus. But then I realized you got to bring them in every year for the winter, and so I realized, well, roses are great because you know camellias might bloom in the winter, or hibiscus are pretty, but you got to bring them in for the winter, like I said. But roses really check all the boxes. They Most of them will bloom year round. They're cold hardy, and these days a lot of them are heat tolerant too. However, one of their biggest flaws is disease resistance, and as we all know, or most people know, is rose rosette virus, and that's going to be one of the big themes of my presentation here, breeding roses of the future, because we have some great roses, but life happens. There's always evolution happening, and there's always going to be new threats. And if we want to preserve our beloved garden crops that we love so much, for example, roses, then we have to take kind of a different approach and think outside the box. And that outside the box thinking or method that I have chosen in my career, not just with roses, but with other crops, is looking to exotic or forgotten or lost species that most breeders would never think about. And the reason most people don't like to work with species in general is because they're wild and they can bring in a lot of unruly and crazy traits. But in the end, I think it's worth it, and I'll show you why. So, uh, let's start with an example of chickpeas. So, as we all know, this is what your common chickpea looks like. This is a modern chickpea. But I had the opportunity to work at a company in California who did an expedition to Turkey and other parts of the Middle East, and they found this. So what this is a preserved chickpea. Believe it or not, it's a chickpea. Uh, how they existed in the wild without human intervention 10,000 years ago. So if you look at archaeological sites and just they do complex DNA divergence and all that, we know that this is what uh, it's. They say it's a wild species, and it is, but it's what chickpeas look like 10,000 years ago, which is cool to me because this is also going to apply to roses. So now, uh, here's the cool thing. Well, what happens if we take this ancient species and we bring in its fresh blood with the modern chickpea? Well, what happened? Well, what? what happens is you get much more diversity and cool traits and strengths than either of the parents. And so this is what happened. And so you might think that you would get some halfway in between the two, but what ended up happening when we bring in this 10,000-year-old exotic species, you get all these cool colors. They had different like protein compositions and flavors. And so what I have found in my career is that just like chickpeas or any other crop, the same thing has happened to roses. And our species are or anything that you have at your disposal for breeding, it's called germplasm. And it's really important because if you're only as good as what you have to work with in breeding. So tracking down some of these wild species, if you want to work with them, it can be a little bit difficult, but it is doable, and it's so worth it. And believe it or not, sometimes if you just go out in the wild hiking, you can find them. I found like a wild species called Rosa virginiana. Believe it or not, in Virginia, I've seen it in the wild at a. It was a I forgot the name of the park, but it was famous for its like streams or waterfalls. Maybe someone else can um, tell me, but I did see it in the wild, so they are out there. Now, what about our modern roses? So most of the modern roses that we have today, they're all a combination of these five main, call them like progenitor species. And as you saw in the description of my presentation here, that you know there's at least 100 different rose species, and here are only five. And look at the diversity of colors and shapes and fragrances and different architectures that we have in roses. And all that came from these five species. So right here in the top left is Rosa chinensis. You know, most wild species have only five petals, but this one is kind of an anomaly. It's just a mutation where the stamens mutated into extra petals, and we think that this is the origin of where roses get their multi-petaled trait from. And by the way, this is Old Blush. So Old Blush is preserved, unchanged in the wild from before humans. It is the original Rosa chinensis. It's also famous for introducing reblooming, reblooming trait. Now, in the top center, you have something called Rosa gigantea, and that's where all of our tea roses and hybrid tea roses kind of originate from. And if you look at this Rosa gigantea, yes, it only has five petals, and this is a wild rose, but you can see it already has those kind of big petaled curly traits that you would see in a hybrid tea or a florist rose if they were kind of opened up, or if you pull off like a rose that's a hybrid tea, if you pull off all the petals except the bottom five, it's going to look like this. And it's kind of a mystery to me. It's a chicken or the egg situation because the dried uh, petals and the calyx, which is a part of the flower of Rosa gigantea, it actually smells like tea, the tea that you would drink. But at the same time, the original Rosa gigantea, it's very huge, and hence the name gigantea because it's just a very big rose species, and that's where we get these big, huge hybrid teas from. So I don't know what is the origin of the tea or hybrid tea, if it's come from the size or the flavor. Maybe it's both. And so in the top right here, we have a Rosa wichuriana, but I'm also going to include Rosa multiflora here. They're very similar, and these are our basically you could say like invasive or kind of like the true like wild rose, probably the most wild rose you can think of. Um, they're all over now, but they were introduced into roses to give them the multi-petal thing. So anything that has a bunch of flowers, all the modern landscape roses, your drift roses and um, even knockouts and floribundas all come from multiflora. And the problem is, as we'll see, is that's also introduced a weakness to rose rosette. Now, the bottom left here is a very simple, nothing special looking rose, right? Well, it's actually the original Rosa gallica, and this is a rose species native to Europe, and this is where we get all of our damask rose from, all the old European hybrids that are famous for their big petals and the paintings and all that romance and all that. So they basically crossed Rosa gigantea with Rosa chinensis. And that's where you got a lot of the hybrid perpetuals and a lot of those old garden European roses. But the latest one on the scene is the bottom right here is Rosa fetida, and that is where all yellow roses are descended from this. It's from the Middle East. It's a desert rose, and as I mentioned, it all yellow comes from here. But it when it was crossed with these other pink roses, which have some red pigment in it, that really introduced a lot of other colors as well, like oranges and different shades of red and all that. And so it allowed greater color variation in roses, but this one also introduced a really bad weakness, and that is black spot weakness because Rosa fetida is from the Middle East, right? It's not used to a lot of moisture, and so it never evolved for that. And so when old hybridizers got their hands on this Rosa fetida, they couldn't wait to use it, and I don't blame them. I would too. But everything has a trade-off, and that's where a lot of our weakness to black spot comes from. But that's just the history. There's so much more out there. So, uh, just these are some examples of some other roses. Rosa rugosa, I'm sure most people are probably familiar with that. And you will see a lot of roses descended from it. This is interesting. It's got almost a scaly type foliage, and Rosa rugosa, it has a lot of thorns, and it evolved for beaches and coastal environments. So, in Japan, they call it the beach rose, and it's very unique. It has a lot of tough traits to it, a lot of fragrances, but it really is lacking in that beautiful form that we love. But a great rose to use in breeding. Um, Now, Rosa foliolosa here is it's a very somewhat drought tolerant rose, but um, again, nothing too special. Some of these rose species, uh, they're not as so much special for their blooms, but more for their hidden genetics and their disease resistances or architecture traits. And sometimes their value is not in themselves, it is in what combinations you can get once you cross it with something else. Think back to the chickpea example. That Velcro looking chickpea was too small to eat and very very bitter, hard to process. But once it was crossed with something, then you we got some cool stuff. And so the same thing happened with Rosa foliolosa. So um, Dr. Basie, rest in peace, from Texas A&M. He was actually a mathematician. He made a hybrid of the wild Rosa rugosa and Rosa foliolosa and got Basie's purple. And I should have put a picture here of it, but to this day, Basie's purple is the most purple of purples you can get. It's such a cool rose. One of my top five favorite, most unique roses. I should have put a picture in here. But what's interesting is that the Rosa rugosa that he used, well, it had a white flower, and this Rosa foliolosa had a very light pink, and that made this purple. So it's another example of sometimes the sum is greater than the whole of the parts, if you will. So let's get a little bit more out there and exotic. So this is another Middle Eastern species. It's from it's obviously from the desert areas of I think it's Iran. Yeah, because it's called Rosa persica, or even some people have placed it in an entirely different genus of Holthemia, and that's where we get our modern Holthemia blotch roses. Because if you look at it, it does look like a rose, but it's so far out there and so different that some botanists have said that this is not even a rose. However, um, in the 70s, there were some brave hybridizers that were able to get hybrids with Holthemia persica and I believe it was a musk rose, and they got some pretty cool stuff. And people have stood on the shoulders of those initial breeders and taken that and ran with it. And you can see the beautiful combinations that you can get. Again, the sum greater than the whole of the parts. And I just think this is so cool because some of these Holthemias did inherit some of that drought resistance as well. But remember, just like that Rosa fetida, they really, really struggle they really struggle with black spot resistance. And I've heard some of the more recent ones are a little bit better, but um, everything is pros and cons. So just something to be aware of. But I think they're pretty cool. So here's something else. Now, if you've ever heard of the chestnut rose or Rosa roxburghii, this is what it is. Most of the chestnut roses that we grow here in the U.S., they will make somewhat of a fruit like this, but this is one that is principally used in China, where over there they grow this rose species for food. It's actually grown for its fruit, and I just think that's really cool because it's just an element of roses that we don't think about. And I think part of the reason, or one of the reasons that I've been so successful in my rose breeding and plant breeding career is I try to think of all the things that nobody ever thinks about. And it's something anybody can do. Like you all can do that too if you want. You just got to think about all the stuff that no one's paying attention to. So throughout my career, I've focused on everything but the flower, which is crazy for a rose breeder, but that's what I did. I focused on everything but the flower. And who knows, one day I think it would be cool to use this species to have roses in the garden that look pretty. And once they're done blooming, hey, maybe you can get some nice fruit from this. So these spikes initially can be very hard, but once they get to this fruiting stage, they'll soften up a little bit. And I've tried the jam from this, and it's actually pretty good. Now, another cool thing about that Rosa roxburghii, the chestnut rose, is if you've ever seen it, its bark is gray colored, which I think is just beautiful, and it also has a peeling texture to it, like a crepe myrtle, and it's kind of a hard species to work with. A lot of these are out there. There's a reason not a lot of people do it, but it's so rewarding. So this is a hybrid with another rose that I made with Rosa roxburghii, and I was very happy because you can see in this hybrid, if you look at the bark, it's actually peeling like that classic, crepe myrtle trait, with the gray. And this, it might look like it's in bad health, but no, this is actually kind of what I was hoping for and what I wanted. And so this is not a sign of bad health. And if you look at the flower opened up, it's nothing special, right? But again, that's the trade-off and challenge why people might not want to work with some rose species because all rose species, except for maybe a couple others and Rosa chinensis, except those, all of them are once blooming, and so that once blooming trait is dominant. So just like this one, when you make a hybrid with it, you have to wait at least a year, sometimes 2 years to see that first bloom. Whereas if you're just making crosses with modern roses that are reblooming parents, then you get to see your results instantly. It's like an instant gratification. But as we know in life, instant gratification has its pros and cons. Sometimes you have to, invest a little in waiting, and that's tough. It is tough. So this is another shot of that Rosa Roxburghii hybrid. I thought it was interesting because it didn't inherit those spikes on the rose hip area at all, but it did inherit some of the leaf structure in that bark. Um, so it's just interesting to see how those things play out. But still, it was a very tough species. Now, this is something interesting, and I want to draw to your attention. So this was a hybrid I made of Rosa rugosa. You can see the scaly leaves, and Rosa bracteata. And Rosa bracteata is special because it has these very, very, very fine trichomes on the here in the sepals and then the calyx, and it looks if you look closely, it looks like a reindeer's antler, and if you would feel it, it does have like that very soft, um, very velvety like reindeer antler texture. And the reason that's important is because we've found so far, rose rosette is very bad, and not a lot of roses are resistant to it. Well, we found that Rosa bracteata is a species that is resistant to it, but it's interesting because it's a mechanical resistance. And what we found is that the mites that transmit the virus, they don't like this reindeer antler fur. The mites uh, really like to hide in the new growth, and there's new growth on these Brachyata species has this hair, so the mites just don't like it. Um, which is interesting because there are some academic articles and some papers where you can very easily artificially infect Rosa brachyata with Rose rosette virus, and it is totally susceptible. But in the wild, it just doesn't get it because it's a mechanical resistance. So that's another aspect to consider when breeding roses of the future and using these species is having a multi security, multi line of defense is get that mechanical like a physical resistance, but also a genetic viral resistance from other species, such as Rosa cetidra as well. This here is a species. I'm sorry, a cultivar, uh, a couple of generations down from Rosa brachyata that I was very happy with because a lot of these species are very big and unruly. They have nasty thorns, and they only bloom once. And so this is something where we got all the good traits of the species. We got good blooms and we got good health. And so this is a sibling to glass slipper, which is sold in the Antique Rose Emporium. But it is not glass slipper. But I have hopes for that one in the future for it holding up to Rose Rosette, which we can't tell for sure unless we're doing like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years of trials. We want to be sure. So it's just an example of taming wild species and getting something good. So um, I was very excited to to see this result. And here's another great result of just using various species like Rosa rugosa and the Rosa wichuriana and foliolosa and just all kinds of things. So when I started like mixing a bunch of these, you can find some really cool and tough traits. And so this one you actually can buy from Antique Rose Emporium. It's called Always Hope, and it's super tough, black spot resistant. It's got some fragrance, blooms like crazy, and it makes really nice hips. So just really interesting. It may not be the most spectacular in the bloom, but it's a great rose to use in breeding. It's very fertile, and that's interesting. Let me see if I can go back a little. Yeah. Speaking of fertility, this is a note. So this Brachyata rugosa hybrid that I made, what you'll notice is that see these white petals? That was that is its maximum bloom. So sometimes when you bring in these species, there's genetic incompatibilities. And that's why a species is a species is because they typically are they can't, according to botany, can't cross with any other species without great difficulty. And this is an example of that. So I would say that it's pollen fertile, and um, I never tested if it was good as a seed parent, but it's just an example of like a first generation cross having some of these genetic incompatibilities. So I kept giving it chances and chances, but every bloom on this rose actually looks like this, and it was just the most mutated and sad rose I've ever seen, but the most tough and strong and like invincible plant I've ever seen. So I just think that's a very interesting um, kind of story. You have to keep going and bridge. So I'm sure if I would keep using this, we could get something like really cool. Uh, but it's just an interesting genetic observation. So here's another example. So there's some people, if you're familiar with Shakespeare, have talked about the sweetbriar rose. So Rosa eglanteria. Um, if you look at that rose, or if you ever have Rosa eglanteria, the foliage is sticky and it smells like apples, and it's really nothing special flower-wise, but the foliage is just amazing. It's so fragrant. And so this cultivar pictured here is one that I made. I call it Bluebriar, as a play on words from the original Shakespearean Sweetbriar. And so it does bloom twice a year. It's not repeat blooming, but it does bloom twice, and but it's special because it's foliage. When you see it in person, it really has a lovely bluish tint. And when you rub the leaves, it's not sticky, uh, but it does have a fragrance, and the fragrance to me specifically smells like those like a blueberry muffin. And I just thought that was so cool because, again, you're working with these species and you'll get something different than either of the parents. It's just a really fun um, and rewarding hobby and just venture to go through. Because this blue briar here is extremely, extremely black spot resistant, very vigorous, and also very cold hardy as well. And it does not set hips. That goes back to the genetic incompatibility. But when it does bloom, you get uh, lots of buds. And it's very pollen fertile. So you see in some of the hybrids and the crosses that you'll make that they might be pollen sterile or pollen fertile, and they might be good seed parent, or they might not. Sometimes you get both. Sometimes you'll get neither. It's just that game you have to play. And here's another cool example of crossing with species. So our Native American species like Rosa carolina and Rosa virginiana, that Dr. Basie from Texas A&M used a lot, are very cool because they have amazing fall foliage. And I think that is something that doesn't get a lot of attention because, as I mentioned earlier, I think we focus too much on the rose um, bloom, and rightfully so. It's a beautiful bloom, right? But my whole theme is that there's so much more out there. Like I mentioned earlier, we can get that cool bark, and we can get fruit, we can get fragrance in the leaves, and now in the leaves we can get cool fall color. Just something to consider. We can also get cool sepal shapes. So this isn't a species per se, but it's just a mutation of a crested rose. And if you look closely on the sepals of this rosebud, you'll see these little dots, and those dots are literally like glands of oil that smell like lemon and pine trees and like balsam fir, almost like a Christmas tree. And it's just so these crested moss roses are so cool, and they add fragrance as well to the bud, and it's just another thing we can add to the rose. If you look, it's a mutation, but it just adds more like visual interest and fragrance while you're waiting for the rose to open up. You see, if you look close, you can see those little dots, and that's the glands. And so, yeah, so I'm just gonna take you through just quickly some of the process of actual rose breeding that I've done, and I would have my notes, and that's the pollen, keep it like frozen. Um, nothing too crazy. It's just keeping the pollen frozen and dry and elbow grease. Uh, but organization is important. I would use these waterproof fishing tackle boxes and lab micro mill tube things, and it worked great for me. And here's another example of species diversity. I just wanted to show this is be planting some of the rose crosses, and you can just look at the diversity of the seed, shapes and colors. And so this is many people never get to see this, but this is the process of actually where new rose cultivars come from. So here's what baby rose looks like after 3 months of cold, cold stratification. And then it's so cool, have them labeled by the cross. As you go down to the right, everything is there. It's doing it this way, this broadcast method, to me, it saves so much time and effort than planting them in individual cells. Like I showed earlier, this is actually um, a very older pick, and this is a lot of species, so I didn't care if they're crowded. I just wanted anyone to germinate. And here, the reason why these are planted in a cell is because it was a cross that only got one or two or three seeds from. But if you notice here in the left, and then here, when you have a cross with a lot of seeds, it's best to just do like a broadcast method because then in these big bins, they can also stretch their legs and the seedlings grow a lot quicker as well. You can see here, and this is only after, this is like, you know, plant them in, they'll start coming up in, January, February, and now we're getting into like, March or April here, and just keep going. And you start to see the first blooms. And once you start doing rose breeding as a hobby, it's so exciting to see across. If you're breeding any crop, it's just so exciting to see the crosses that you can get. Um, especially here where I made a cross of a pink rose and a yellow rose. Um, you can see the diversity coming out, different colors, of course, but also different like bloom shapes and like leaf colors and leaf shapes. And the reason why you see aphids, by the way, is because whenever I do plant breeding, I really don't like to baby things, and so I like to test them from an early age. I actually encourage mold. I will go dump aphids on them. I will deliberately try to encourage black spot because um, if you're encouraging the growth of a new cultivar that can't handle uh, these things from day one, then I think you're doing everyone a disservice. It's tempting to do it because you want to see the pretty flower and the pretty smell, which I did that at first too. I mean, everyone does, right? But it's tough. But if you really want to get somewhere and have something worthwhile, then you have to do this. And yes, a lot of them do end up dying because I don't baby them. Let the insects get them, and whoever survives survives, and you just go from there. Um, but if you just want to be like a hobbyist and cross roses for fun, or cross two roses that maybe have sentimental value to you, then and you want to spray them, that's totally okay too. That's totally fine. Um, there's nothing wrong with just doing things just for fun. And this was like it's a cool little seedling, only several months after germinating, so we call that a maiden bloom. And here, just a tray I pulled out of rose seedlings, so you can see how um, when I've incorporated all these different species, some of them have do revert back to see like on the bottom left, some of these like five petal ones, but some of them do maintain and get more of those like high petal counts, and some are intermediate. But you just get a lot of diversity, and it's one of the few times where I would like to look at the blooms because these are the survivors of that initial trial process. And so this looking at the bloom is kind of the last thing I would do as opposed to the first thing. Um, and it's so cool if you do this. Anyone can do it. Just requires a little patience and just protecting those seeds from rodents and squirrels in the winter. Um, and so just want to talk about some of my accomplishments real quick. Um, so Femme Fatale, famous. It got a lot of awards. I'm really proud of it because um, I worked really hard to get a hybrid tea rose that could have the black spot resistance, be very fragrant, and have powdery mildew resistance. I call that like the triple crown. Although now it's going to be the quadruple crown. I don't think that Femme Fatale would be resistant to rose rosette. There's no reason it would be based off of its ancestry. But going forward in the future, that's going to be the new thing. Now there's four things you have to have at Femme Fatale again. Um, yeah, rose rosette, in addition to those previously mentioned. And this is up for anything. Now, up for anything is something sorry, it's not the best pick. Um, but it won. It's doesn't have that many petals, but it is a nice red. It's descended from Knockout and Miracle on the Hudson, which has a lot of really unique species, and Rosa satidra, which is our Native another Native American species that is resistant to rose rosette. And there are a lot of theories on that. We don't know why uh, officially, but we know that for some reason that Rosa satidra and its hybrids do fare very well against rose rosette. And I'm very proud of Up for Anything because it has that commercial bloom power of like knockout and diverse species background of Miracle in the Hudson and the Rosa satidra in it. So it has the black spot powdery mildew, and I'm hoping Rose Rosette, its only weakness is it doesn't have fragrance, but maybe if I cross Up for Anything with Femme Fatale, maybe we'll get what we want. Uh, but still, it's the first hybrid Satidra um, that the American Rose Society has trialed in, I think, like 30 or 40 years. It's been decades since anyone has done a Rosa sativa, so I was really really proud of that. I didn't want to do it just as a shrub rose because it's not. Um, but yeah, we don't know officially yet, but high hopes. And yeah, this is my passion. I love plant breeding and genetics and gardening and horticulture in general. So again, thank you for having me, and I love answering questions. So any questions you guys have, I'm happy to answer.
That's fantastic, Andrew. Thank you so much.
You're
There are a
welcome.
bunch of questions in the chat. Would you like me to read them to you so you can answer those, or do you want to look yourself?
Let's see. Let me see where I can see in the chat. Oh, chat. I see. I see. Your messages. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna start from the top here. Carol says Basie's purple can be seen at the U.S. Botanic Garden. That's true. I think I remember seeing it there once too. It's you sh if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. One of the most unique roses you'll ever see. In fact, when we were doing cuttings of Basie's purple at the Antique Rose Emporium, when you're cutting up the stems, even the inside the stem is purple, like the juice is purple. Now what's interesting is Basie's purple is one of, in my opinion, one of the most hardest roses to breed with, and I think it suffers from that species, species cross sterility. And I have a theory. I haven't done it yet. It's on my bucket list of my life. There's a process you can do called like chromosome doubling, and so I think if we just double the chromosomes of Basie's purple, it would have some fertility, and we could start using it in our the more modern roses. Okay, Barclay says, "Is the notorious multiflora rose a utility in rose breeding? Any utility in rose breeding?" So that's a great question. I would say that um, it would have utility, maybe not so much in the United States because rose rosette is spreading. I would also say that, and that's where the weakness of rose rosette comes from. It comes from rose multiflora. So we, um, there's no like council that got together and decided this, but I just know from talking to other rose breeders, every one of them has come to the same conclusion on their own, is that we want to get as far away from Rosa multiflora as possible, especially since that there are other species out there that have that multi-blooming, big blooming trait besides multiflora, like Rosa wicheriana, and a really really cool one called Rosa cymosa or Rosa chymosa. Um, also has here. Maybe I can spell it here in the chat. Check that
And
out.
Andrew, this is Olivia. I've heard that it's false that multiflora rose is kind of the most susceptible to rose rosette. It's only that most places where multiflora rose is growing are unmonitored. People don't see it, and that's allowing it to spread. Have you heard that theory too? Like, what's the science
Well,
on that?
yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. So the problem, here's the thing with so yeah, you're entirely correct. So the reason why rose rosette and Rosa multiflora is such a problem, it's not that it's genetically weaker. It does have we do see like a somewhat of a statistical association with susceptibility of roses to rose rosette and multiflora ancestry. However, it's more of like a mechanical thing. So the problem is that a lot of multiflora rose hybrids and Rosa multiflora itself, they bloom so much and make so many seeds that when rose rosette gets in there, because it is susceptible, that these seeds go everywhere. And rose rosette is a very slow death. It's not a quick death. It's a slow and painful death for the rose plant. And so by the time the initial infection has killed the Rosa multiflora or its hybrids, its seeds have spread everywhere, and those seeds have grown up and been exposed and are now infected as well. So it's spreading. So there is a genetic aspect to it, but it's not that Rosa multiflora is um any less susceptible than the average rose. It does show a uh, like a little bit more of like a genetic weakness to rose rosette as well. But it's really you're right. It's really that mechanical thing.
Thank you.
Sure, sure. So is first year flower typical with rose seedlings? So it is if you're working with two parents that are repeat blooming. So repeat blooming is a recessive trait, and you'll know if your new baby cultivar is going to be a repeat bloomer is if it flowers immediately. So when that rose seedling starts getting its first few leaves, it in the tray, you're going to see a tiny little baby bloom. If you don't see that, it's not going to be a repeat bloomer, and it won't bloom for 1 to 3 years. And okay, so Barclay says, are there protocols for measuring black spot resistance? So yeah, there are. So the problem is that there are they used to say eight, but now there's like 12. So yeah, so there's like 12, like 10 to 12 different they call in pathology you call it races. So there's different like races of black spot, and there's four different black spot resistance genes. So some roses have one or several, and then like for example like RDR1 might be resistant to race 1, 3, and 5, and something like that. And so I'm not really the expert on measuring black spot resistance, but as far as the protocol, but there is an official academic protocol published by, I believe, David Zlisak, by the University of Wisconsin. He's actually my good friend. So yeah, where they measure like the lesion size and how many lesions per leaf area. So it does exist out there. It's just in academic articles. Okay, so Dennis says with F1 interspecies crosses with the more than a few seeds, is there significant variation among siblings? That's a great question. That's a great question. So the answer is no. And the reason that is because when you have a species out in the wild, it's pretty uniform. It's not like a rose garden where you have all these different cultivars. So you might have some variation within a species, but uh, Rosa virginiana and um, one part of the US is going to look totally the same in another part of the US. And so that means it's all for each locus, for each gene in the chromosome, it's homozygous. So essentially what that means is there's no hidden recessive traits. And so when you make these interspecies crosses in that F1 generation, you're only going to see these dominant traits. Um, because it's just the way that genetic works out. And it's funny, Dennis, we have a saying in the plant breeding and genetics world that all the magic happens in the F2 and F3. F1 rarely get anything like that what you want, but when you like back cross or self-pollinate that F1, you can see all those hidden traits come out. So yeah, the F2 and F3 is really where the magic happens. That's what we say. Uh, Barclay says, is fragrance a recessive trait? That's $1 million question. So it's neither recessive nor dominant. It's just a quantitative trait. And so what that means is that so there's some in genetics. So we say there's either quantitative or qualitative. Easier way to understand it is uh, like a light switch. So there's two types of light switches, right? A light switch and a light dimmer. So some traits you either have or you don't, right? So for example, like red hair, you either have red hair or you don't. But whereas like height, someone's height, it's not necessarily are you tall or are you short. It's a spectrum, right? It's like a dimmer. It's like how tall are you? And so we see that with fragrance and roses. And to make it more complicated, not only are all the fragrance genes like light dimmer traits, but if memory serves me correctly, the articles that I've read most recently, they've discovered over 5,000 different fragrance genes in roses, and that's why when you make some of these crosses, no two are the same. And I have found a very interesting thing that if you cross two different roses that are very fragrant, that have so I'll give you an example. So two of my favorite roses are Faith Whittlesey and a David Austin rose called Sceptered Isle. Now both those roses are extremely fragrant, but their fragrances are totally different. They're not even similar at all. They're very, very different. Now, all of the F1 crosses between those two, none of the seedlings are fragrant at all. And this is two of the most fragrant roses I know of. Um, Now, I suspect one day that what I want to do on my bucket list is do some back crosses or self-pollinate in that F2 and F3. Then you would start to see some that fragrance come back or reconfigure. Um, but most of the time, fragrance is kind of like a white whale in the breeding world. Like you can breed for it, but it's really really tough, and you kind of have to get lucky. But in general, what you find is that if you do have fragrant parents and you keep crossing with a fragrant, keep crossing, you eventually will get something out there. So, for example, that Femme Fatale rose that I won all those awards for, one of its parents was not fragrant at all. It had no fragrance, and the other parent had a very mild fragrance. So that's just something interesting to consider. However, it had grandparents and great grandparents that were very fragrant. So it's just part of that delicate dance you have to play play like matching out and planning all these crosses and seeing what you get. So is Rose Parentage open source? Uh, yeah, it is open source. If you can get it. I firmly believe in um being very open about the parentage of roses. I don't see any reason to hide it. But unfortunately, you will see people on like Help Me Find or some rose breeders out there that on patents there or releases, they'll just list the two parents as like a seedling times seedling, um, implying that they don't know what the parentage is, but they really know. And I think if you hide it, I think you're not only doing a disservice to everyone else in the long run, but it's so funny to me because rose breeding or any plant breeding for that matter is not like a recipe. It's not like baking cookies. So like if someone else would make that cross that I did of like Sceptred Isle and Faith Whittlesey, they might get similar results, but it would be very, very different. They might get something better. They might get something worse. So it's um it's kind of interesting to me that people do try to make it proprietary because it's not something you can really patent. In fact, part of uh, the getting a plant patent is you have to disclose the parentage of uh, of your new variety. And like I said, it's unfortunate that some people place that parentage as in the patents as like just seedling. But yeah, for the most part, I think people are pretty open about it. But there's a few out there that are like weirdly protective about it. Okay, Dennis asked a really good question. Are there groups of rose species that easily cross, as seen with oaks? And so, yeah, there are. So a lot of the Native American species do cross easily with each other. So like your Rosa Carolinas of the world, the Rosa Virginiana, Rosa Satidra, will generally cross well with each other and with other modern roses. Where I find that some of them more. Also, the Rosa gigantea crosses very easily because it's a tea rose. I mean, most modern roses have tea rose in them. Where you get to see groups that are tough are the okay, so but botanically it's called like the Platyrodon group. It's not that important, but just to remember that it includes like Rosa laevigata, so the Cherokee rose and the chestnut rose. Um, they look very different from each other, but genetically they're in a group and very, very different, very, very far away genetically from roses, hard to cross with, but if you do, it's very valuable. You know, like the chestnut Roxburghii. So to answer your question, like yes, there definitely are. And so Barclay says once you have the result, you want how's the individual recreated? So great question. So uh that individual is just grown to be a large enough size so you can take cuttings. And so it's all asexual propagation. So every rose variety out there, it's pretty much like a clone. It's all done by cuttings.
Anybody can unmute and ask verbally as well. I have a question,
Yeah.
Andrew. Crossing by pollen and flowers, great, awesome. You have a lot of patience. Could certainly never do that, just personality wise. But what are some of the more quicker methods you use? Like, are you using, for your lab techniques?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, a lot of those like pollen storage and freezing stuff, which does take a long time, that's for like really rare roses or like species stuff. But some of the quickest ways you can do is like if you two roses you want to cross, you go out in the morning, or actually even better, you go out the day before, find a rose that you know is going to bloom tomorrow morning, and you take off all the petals, and you take off all the pollen anthers, so the pollen doesn't burst in the morning. And so when you come back out there the next day in the morning, you'll just have the female part of the flower left that is now receptive to any pollen, but there's no pollen from its own flower, and there's no petals, so the insects and bees won't be attracted to it. And then you just find another flower from the pollen parent you want to use, and you just open it up, and there'll be pollen. You just go and rub it on and record the cross. So that's a quick method that I would do. Or if you want to be even quicker, a great way to practice, a great way to start, which I even like professional breeders use to this day, is you just go out and collect open pollinated hips and see what nature gives you. You just wait till the fall and get those hips. Um, you can get some really cool results from those sometimes.
What are your molecular techniques that you've used?
So the only molecular techniques that I've used is just looking up academic information on known cultivars. For example, like Bright Eyes, a cultivar named Bright Eyes, which I've used a lot, where someone out there has genetically confirmed that, oh, it has RDR1, RDR2, RDR3, RDR4, which is rose rosette. I'm sorry, it's RDR. It's like a black spot resistance gene. Remember those are the four black spot resistant genes? Um, I'll look up I'll look up if certain cultivars have certain genes that confer certain disease resistances. Um, but there's that, and there's also the chromosome, and that gets into Dennis's question. Some molecular techniques. In roses, chromosome count, meaning like diploid or triploid or tetraploid, is huge because it can really affect fertility. So yeah, that's the uh, techniques I've used. But getting into Dennis's question, so um, yeah, most I would say modern roses are either tetraploid or triploid. In fact, they try to a lot of commercial breeders they are seeking out uh, triploids, which is three sets of chromosomes. So because when you have an odd number of chromosomes, you're not always, but statistically, your fertility is reduced. And so if a rose is blooming and it's a triploid and it's sterile, it's not going to be fertilized and it won't make a hip. And creating rose hips takes a lot of energy out of the plant. And so if a rose is not making any rose hips or not very easily, like for example a knockout, which is a triploid, then it's just going to keep blooming and blooming, and you're going to have lots of blooms and it'll never be any rose hips. And so that's why they try to do that. But you will find there's always exceptions. There are diploids that are very fertile. There are tetraploids that are sterile. Now, the most fertile roses are diploids and tetraploids, but there does exist out there a pentaploid, and that's that Rosa eglanteria, that Shakespearean sweetbriar rose. It is actually a pentaploid. And there's even one hexaploid. It has six sets of chromosomes, believe it or not, and that is the infamous White Rose of York. If anyone's familiar with the Wars of the Roses in England, the White Rose of York is actually a hexaploid. So that's interesting. And are there descendants from Harrison's yellow? Probably almost every modern rose is descended from this because Harrison's yellow is like a first generation, or some even consider just Rosa foetida. But Harrison's yellow is only one generation removed from that Rosa foetida, and Harrison's yellow is the one that a lot of breeders used a long, long time ago. So probably most or any rose that you see today that has any bit of yellow or orange in it, it's descended from it. Yeah, so Dennis says, assuming that most species are diploid, are breeders attempting to induce tetraploidy? Yes, that's exactly what I was talking about with Basie's purple. I think that would be great because Dr. Basie at Texas A&M, he found that when you make these, it's true, most species are diploid, but not all. Most are diploid. When you make these crosses between two different diploid species, they're very sterile. Now, Dr. Basie found that the more sterile the species cross was, that when he doubled the chromosomes artificially, um, turning them into tetraploids with a chemical, that the more fertile they became when they became tetraploids, which is really interesting. Now, that wasn't always the case, but there's a lot of genetic reasons for that, and that's because when you have a diploid cross and something is very far away genetically, you have a lot of essentially like missing genes, or something where you would need two copies. And so when you artificially make it a tetraploid, a lot of those gaps are kind of just gotten rid of, and to oversimplify it. But the answer is yes. What was Gay Hammond Rose derived from? Have to remind me, is that the one, was that the purple one? Which one was that?
Yeah, I
Olivia?
remember from David Slezak.
Yeah, so I think it's
No, no odor to speak of.
uh, I'm not I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think it had some type of I think it had some type of Rosa Satidra in it. Um, but yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head, unfortunately. So what chemicals are used to induce tetraploidy? So there's two chemicals. Number one is colchicine, which is extremely dangerous. In fact, anytime handling it, you have to be in a full hazmat suit with gloves and outside because um, colchicine, it does unfortunately cause cancer if it gets inside your body because what it does is it stops cells, the cellular division process. And the way that it turns diploids to tetraploids um, is that it essentially, in order for a cell, for growth to happen in biology, a cell doubles its chromosomes and then divides down the middle, and now you have two cells. Well, colchicine will freeze cells in that process for about 24 hours. So if you happen to get some cells that have doubled their chromosomes but haven't divided in half yet, um, the colchicine comes in, it freezes and resets the process. So it'll like restart later where it left off from. So it kind of thinks that it's starting from scratch. And so now if you've got double chromosomes, it is like artificially chemically thinking, oh, this is my baseline, even though it's not its normal baseline. But now these days more people are using another chemical called oryzalin, and I believe that's what David Zlisak prefers to use. Um, I have never used oryzalin, but he says it works. It's way, way safer. I've used colchicine before. It's very difficult to use because even like you put too much, it's very easily to just totally kill the cells from the area you put it on. But yeah, maybe I can yeah, it's colchicine and oryzalin. Oh, and let's see. Gay Hammond from yeah, Rise and Shine and uh Beeline. Okay. Yeah, yeah, colchicine is used in yeah to treat yeah,
So,
Dennis is
you know,
right.
I think it would be good if Dennis came off mute and talked a little bit. He's a pharmacist as well as a nationally known iris breeder, and he
Oh,
ought to
cool.
disclose his background to so
Yeah.
that you understand where his questions are coming from.
Yeah, no, so he's right that it is. Yeah, I did know that it is used to treat liver failure. The thing is that the colchicine required to do the chromosome doubling, at least in that we did at A&M, um, is I guess at a higher concentration or whatnot that they at least Dr. Burns said, it's not uh you got to have like the whole setup. It could be carcinogenic because it messes with cellular division and stuff. So that's my experience with it. Um, it's yeah,
It's not nearly as dangerous as people let on that it is.
right. And that's been my experience with it because like I remember when I was working at the chickpea place, I mentioned wanting to use it and it was like, oh, like red alert emergency, like oh, the whole lab is gonna get cancer and I'm like, it's not that bad.
It actually, in humans, they titrate the dose for an a gout attack, and you take it until you develop diarrhea, and the diarrhea is from the cells in the intestinal lining not reproducing and sloughing off.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
But it is, but a the usual dose is like zero point 0.6 milligrams every 2 hours until diarrhea develops or the gout is relieved.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
I know.
now they'll give it to you and they give you a very low dose, but they put a number of days that
Mm,
you take it and then you have to stop. So hopefully you don't get diarrhea, but
yeah,
you're taking it within the limit that you can tolerate it and it works effectively to relieve your gout.
Uh,
right,
and
right.
it's also used as a low maintenance dose sometimes once or twice a day, and as long as the person can tolerate it. But they usually frown on that now. That was standard of practice 30 years ago.
Yeah,
The other chemical you mentioned, is that uh,
it's an
a
herbicide.
pre-emergent?
Yeah, it exists. Exactly. Yeah.
Is that brand name Surfland maybe?
I don't know. It might be. I don't know the brand name. I just know that David Zesak says Oryzalin, and I've seen that in literature too. Um, although, like personally, I'm not familiar with how to even apply it, like whether like in any dosage rates or anything. But um, it's supposedly, you can do it. But I've had success just in the past with the culture scene and doing like a dropper on the growing tip I want to try to work on. And then you just look in the new if you look for any new growth that all of a sudden the stem is thicker and the leaves are bigger, you can kind of tell that probably something happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, um, I've mainly played with the iris insata or the Japanese irises, and there's huge variation within them. Uh, but the idea of going back to the species or to a wild uh, uh, germplasm and reintroducing it makes perfectly good sense to me.
Yeah, yeah, thanks.
You're to be applauded for doing that.
Yeah, yeah, I think more people should do it.
Well, we spend a lot of time talking about preserving germplasm,
Yeah.
but that's an honest to God way to do it.
Right, right, exactly. Thank you for yeah, so
But-
yeah, thank you guys for having me. Yeah.
So, I have a question.
Sure.
What traits are breeders emphasizing because they think that those are the traits that people want in a rose a product, and what to what degree is sort of playing around of what is of interest to the breeder, but may not be the most commercially desirable. How do those factors um, come into balance or conflict when you are breeding roses?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's kind of like this delicate dance because, like for example, the general public or commercial market, they don't understand crested roses or moss roses or
That's right.
like the crepe myrtle bark. So something that I would try to work on when I would get the time, and then you kind of hope that you get that trait into something that is traditionally considered commercial, and then people start to notice it, right? Um, and I think that is something that still hasn't been done in the commercial rose breeding world that I'd like to see is to get some of those really cool traits into some more commercial roses. But also see the reverse, also see like really big corporate, big commercial um, people focusing on certain things while ignoring and being kind of like behind the times, I would say, and not focusing on what people want because I think that there is such a demand for black spot resistance, and so like I'll give an example of there's this fairly new rose, maybe 10 years or so, rose called like a Neil Diamond. Okay,
Yeah.
now I love striped roses. I think they're great. I've always been fascinated with like cool rose traits. I love striped roses. And so I was just at a Cultivate, which is a horticulture conference a month ago, and it was like Weeks Roses or something. They were like advertising like Neil Diamond, and I remember growing it like 10 years ago. And so they're showing, off this Neil Diamond rose, and they just like Photoshop. It's just the bloom, and it's striped, it's red and white, and it's so pretty. And I'm thinking like. Um, this is kind of like outdated because I actually grew it, and that is one of the most awful plants for black spot resistance that I found. And now that was in Louisiana. Now maybe in California it might do better, but I thought that its architecture was just like one straight up stem, and like no beautiful like evenness and whatnot. And it's kind of like sure the bloom is beautiful, but everything else is lacking. I mean, I'm sure it's fragrant. I think I remember being fragrant too. But that's an example. That's like the other side of the coin.
Yes. And Neil Diamond would be a black spot magnet here.
Yeah. So okay. So I'm not crazy.
That's
Oh,
right.
Now,
I think one of the biggest problems with plant breeders is uh, juggling what you personally want to do versus what the commercial side of it wants. And with irises in particular, it's the standards that have been written within the judge's manual as to what is acceptable.
ah,
I remember walking into one garden, and saw all sorts of interesting things, and uh, the breeder was ripping out things that really should have been paid attention to.
mm,
And I asked why, and she said, because they'll never win a Dykes medal.
mm,
And she was going for the gold. That's it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
never going back and looking and say, well, this never looking at what doesn't meet a standard. So, uh,
Right.
and I
Yeah.
think she sold herself short.
No, yeah, it's sad. You see the exact same thing in the rose world. Although not so much anymore. People are starting to get away from it, but it still exists out there. I think there's still like these like guidebooks that they'll publish for like rose shows. And I mean, if you go to a rose show, what are they doing? It's just the stem and it's focusing on the bloom itself, which I mean that's its own
Yeah.
sub community, and I get it. I'm sure like irises too, but for I think for the future and the average person who wants to grow these things in their yard, it's got to be more than that.
But I used to be very serious about Iris shows, and I refused to grow a show stem anymore. I'm done with it.
Yeah, good for you.
Andrew, can you talk a little about the work you've done with sweet potatoes?
Sure. So if you guys didn't know, so I'm actually also the breeder of LSU's Treasure Island sweet potatoes series, and th those are cool because they are the first ever edible ornamental sweet potatoes in the whole world.
Ah,
And so when I proposed that idea, there's actually a really I can send it to the group. There's an old LSU video where they did a little thing on me showing that I was doing this, and it was before Treasure Island got released. So it's kind of interesting seeing the beforehand. But yeah, so it's kind of the similar to the species concept. So I proposed the idea to um, professor on day one of the job. I'm like, well, wouldn't it be cool to get like a an edible ornamental because these ornamental sweet potatoes they don't make a root, or they make a root and it's kind of bitter or it's tough. It's just not pretty. And I think part of that is maybe they're thinking that if they're growing in pots, you don't want that root because these sweet potato roots, I've seen them destroy, totally crack pots because that growing, when the sweet potato root is growing, it's exerting 200 psi constantly. And I've seen pots literally just come out one morning and they're just exploded. But I think for the garden though, it's great. And so it took a few years, but no one had ever tried to, cross these ornamentals with your commercial, high-powered, big farmer sweet potatoes. But I did it and kept back crossing and mixing and matching, and I eventually got yeah, I got the first edible ornamental, and that was really fun and it was really cool. And I think for any breeder out there or aspiring breeder, I think one of the best things you can do, uh, because this applied to me, I think one of the best things you can do is go learn how to breed another crop. Because I think what holds some rose breeders back is that they've only ever done rose breeding and they've only ever tried working in roses. And working, I've worked a little bit in wheat and the sweet potatoes, and I've done a lot personally in tomatoes and peppers. That's my favorite thing to breed, really, is peppers. Those are super fun. And when you and chickpeas, of course, it's my previous job. And so when you do these other crops, you kind of see how other people do things, and it opens up new ideas, and it, um, kind of like gets some fresh blood in your mind on ways to think about things. And uh, yeah, I think it's just a good thing to do.
Thank you
While
so
you're
much.
working on sweet potatoes, could you look for breeding in deer resistance?
Oh yeah, the classic. Yeah, that that may not ever be possible, but yeah, I know for my garden, it took a lot. It took I think a year of trying before I finally got built a fence strong enough to keep the deer out of everything because they're really persistent, as you know.
I don't grow sweet potatoes anymore because they're a deer magnet.
Yeah,
They, I,
they love.
I can have deer all over the property. They leave my gardens alone, but I plant sweet potatoes and they'll be right there.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's like candy to them. Leaves, yeah.
Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about you've had this wonderful breeding career, and the rose world, of course, adores you. Can you tell us a little bit about where you're living and what you're doing now that you've left the Antique Rose Emporium?
Yeah, so after I left Antique Rose Emporium and Texas A&M, that's when I moved to California and did the chickpea breeding for a while. But now I live in Maryland, uh, Boonesboro, Maryland, which is as y'all know, it's like a little south of Hagerstown. And
Been there.
so yeah, so as you can imagine, then I worked for 2 years at a company, in an indoor farming company, breeding tomatoes. And by the way, um. I think that the indoor vertical farming specifically, I think is just a kind of hype. I think there's not commercial uh, profitability in it because at the end of the day, after spending some time in it, I'm like, I gotta get the heck out of here because it just the numbers don't add up. And part of that is because the sun is free. You can have all the most efficient LEDs in the world, but the sun is free. So yeah, but now I've struggled to find a horticulture or plant breeding job around in this apart from that in the DMV area. But for now, I recently started at a risk management company who they TPG Risk Management. They deal in commercial big ag commercial greenhouses and farms and um, do like wineries and horse stables and stuff, doing like risk management for them. But yeah, I would love to get back into breeding officially.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. I don't know if there are any other questions or comments. I want everybody to have a chance to ask their final questions. I know in Maryland, with cannabis being legal, that people are probably wondering a little bit, why are you not in the cannabis breeding business?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. In fact, people would actually ask me all the time, and I say that's the one thing I don't know much about. I did look a little into it, and it looks like it'd be a really interesting challenge. Um, but but part of it is if you did want to get serious about cannabis breeding, the problem is that legally, last I checked, you have to you can't have any more than 4 plants on your property. So Maryland allows you like I think tops 4 plants, and if you
Two.
have two or two, okay, there you go. So I need to
Virginia
supplement.
has four, two in Maryland.
There it is, yeah. So it's kind of hard to have a breeding program with that, but yeah, I think it would be I think it's only a matter of time. I think it's kind of like one of those things like it just it's unstoppable at this point that it'll eventually be federalized legal. I don't know if it might be next year, it might be 20 years, but I think it will get there eventually. And I think there's a lot of people, even in my current job, I mean, there are these guys that have um just all over the country, just millions and millions of dollars they're pouring into cannabis greenhouses, with the expectation that in a few years that it will be more of a legal thing, and they're trying to get ahead of the game. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, you missed the
Well,
Four Seasons Garden Club SunMed tour, where we got to see the entire operation, including the mother house and all the mother plants, and that was so much fun. But we'll find another way to get you out there if you're interested. I want
Yeah,
to thank you so much for your talk tonight. I want to be
you're
respectful of
welcome.
you, and I know you've got little ones, and want to be respectful of your family.
Yeah,
Thank you for your talk tonight. I really
you're very
appreciate
welcome.
it, and we'll follow up with you afterwards. Thank you for everyone who attended. I know a few dropped off as we ran over time, but I appreciate this conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye bye.